Sheikh Amir Al Nazir's $1.8 million wedding was supposed to be the event that defined luxury in Dubai until Liana Corvell, the bride everyone believed was pure and perfect, led him straight into a nightmare of deceit, betrayal, and blood. When the Sheikh discovered that his elegant new wife was already married to Nabi Hansar, a struggling French artist, the fairy tale turned into a deadly obsession that would end beneath the sands of the Dubai desert. The entire city of Dubai shimmered with anticipation as word spread about Sheikh Amir Al Nazir's grand wedding. His name had long been synonymous with power and extravagance. He was the man who turned sand into skylines, who owned fleets of cars, private jets, and even a personal island shaped like a falcon. Every move he made was watched, admired, and envied. When he announced that he would be marrying a young woman from France named Liana Corvell, curiosity ignited like wildfire across the Middle East. Who was this woman pure enough to capture the heart of a man known for his arrogance and wealth? The wedding was unlike anything Dubai had seen in years. Over 1,000 guests from across the globe arrived in luxury cars that formed a golden line. Outside the Al Nazir Palace, each corner of the venue glimmered under the desert sun, with imported crystal chandeliers, fountains filled with rose petals, and a marble floor engraved with the couple's initials. The Sheikh spared no expense. Over $1.8 million was spent on the celebration, and yet, every detail felt priceless. The palace seemed to breathe luxury. Silk curtains from Turkey, gold-plated utensils from Italy, and an orchestra brought from Vienna all performed in perfect harmony. As Liana stepped out of the Rolls-Royce that carried her to the ceremony, the crowd gasped. Her white gown shimmered under the sunlight, its fabric soft as mist, reflecting pure grace. Cameras captured every second, broadcasting the moment across news channels and social media platforms. The Sheikh stood at the altar, tall and confident, a symbol of royal authority wrapped in designer fabric. To the world, it looked like destiny, the union of beauty and power, innocence and dominance. But for those who looked closer, there was something unspoken in Liana's eyes, a depth of sadness hidden beneath layers of calm composure. Liana Corvell was not like the women who usually surrounded Sheikh Amir. She wasn't a celebrity or a model from an elite background. She was quiet, observant, and distant. Many assumed she was simply shy, overwhelmed by the sudden spotlight. Yet her silence was not born of humility. It came from fear. Every moment of this wedding was a reminder that she no longer had control over her life. The palace that glowed with gold felt to her like a cage made of diamonds. Throughout the evening, people whispered stories about how the Sheikh had met her. Some said he saw her during a fashion event in Dubai and instantly declared she was meant to be his wife. Others believed she was chosen through an agency that introduced foreign women to the elite. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. She had appeared out of nowhere and was now bound to one of the most powerful men in the Gulf. The ceremony concluded with fireworks that lit up the night sky, painting it in gold and red. Liana stood beside her new husband, smiling for the cameras as drones captured the spectacle from above. Her face was calm, her posture perfect, but her thoughts were far away. Thousands of miles from the desert she now called home. She remembered the quiet streets of France, the small apartment she once shared with someone she truly loved, and the life she had promised she would return to. The cheers of the guests drowned out the quiet ache in her chest when the celebrations ended, and the palace grew silent. Liana walked through the empty halls lined with portraits of the Sheikh's ancestors. Each face stared back with authority, reminding her of the world she had stepped into, one where love was a luxury, and loyalty was demanded, not earned. Outside, the city lights twinkled against the dark sky, as if mocking her. She was the new bride of Dubai's most powerful man, yet she had never felt more alone. What no one in the palace knew was that behind her angelic beauty and the title of Sheikh Amir's wife, there existed a truth that could destroy everything. A truth buried thousands of miles away, waiting to resurface when least expected. Months before the glittering Dubai wedding, Liana Corvell's life had been the complete opposite of wealth. She lived in a tiny Paris apartment with cracked walls and a leaky ceiling that hummed with the sound of rain each night. Her job at a small cafe barely paid enough to cover rent, but she found peace in the routine, the aroma of coffee beans, the hum of conversation, and the quiet corners where she could read between shifts. That was where she met Nabi Hansar, a struggling artist who spent hours sketching customers and painting the city's fading beauty. He had no fame, no fortune, only passion. What drew Liana to him wasn't his art, but his ability to see her as more than just another face in the crowd. They fell in love quickly, the kind of love that feels invincible in its simplicity. Their evenings were filled with dreams, not possessions. They would sit on their rooftop under the Paris sky, speaking of a future where Nabil's art would hang in galleries, and Liana would manage her own small business. Money was scarce, but their affection made life feel rich. When bills piled up and Nabil's paintings stopped selling, they decided to marry quietly in a civil ceremony witnessed only by their friends. No designer dresses, no gold, no cameras, just a simple promise that whatever came, they would face it together. But as time passed, Nabil's debts grew, and their dreams began to collapse. Galleries rejected his work, the cafe owner cut Liana's hours, and eviction notices started arriving at their door. One cold evening, Nabi came home with a new idea. He had heard about opportunities for young women to work abroad in luxury cities: Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Doha, where beauty and grace could be enough to make a living. He told her it would only be for a short while, that she could model, save money, and return. He believed in her elegance, her poise, and her ability to survive in any world. Liana didn't want to leave him, but their desperation left her no choice. She promised she would come back, no matter what. When she first arrived in Dubai, she felt overwhelmed by the grandeur of the city, the endless towers, the spotless streets, the desert stretching beyond the horizon. Everything seemed too perfect, too polished. Through an agency, she began working as a hostess at exclusive events, where men in suits and women in diamonds floated through rooms scented with expensive perfumes. That was where she first caught the attention of Sheikh Al-Nazir. He was unlike anyone she had ever met, confident, mysterious, and surrounded by silent respect. When he noticed her, she could feel the weight of his gaze. Within days, invitations began arriving for her to attend private gatherings, then dinners, and eventually, he requested to see her alone. Liana tried to avoid him at first, keeping her distance, but the agency encouraged her, saying it was an opportunity that could change her life. They made it clear that pleasing someone of his stature could secure her future. At first, Sheikh was charming, patient, and generous. He showered her with gifts she didn't want, but couldn't refuse: pearls, designer clothes, a private car. Slowly, what started as admiration turned into obsession. When he proposed, it wasn't a question, it was a declaration. The pressure from those around her, the promises of security, and the fear of losing everything forced her into silence. She wrote to Nabi, begging him to understand, but her messages went unanswered. What she didn't know was that the letters never reached him. The agency had intercepted them. As the weeks passed, Liana convinced herself it was only temporary. She would marry the Sheikh, protect Nabi from any backlash, and find a way to send him money so they could rebuild their life later. It was a lie she told herself to survive. On the day of her engagement, she looked at her reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back, a stranger dressed in luxury but carrying a heart filled with guilt. She knew that by stepping into the world of Sheikh Al-Nazir, she was trading her love for survival. And though she tried to bury the memory of Nabi Hansar, love, she would soon learn, has a way of clawing its way back from the past, no matter how deeply it is hidden. After the grand wedding, Liana's life transformed into something that felt more like a dream trapped inside a glass cage. The palace, though breathtaking, carried a kind of silence that echoed through its marble halls. Every morning, servants lined up to greet her, their eyes lowered, their words rehearsed. She had a wardrobe worth fortunes, diamonds that caught sunlight like tiny stars, and servants at her call. Yet, in her heart, she felt nothing but emptiness. Each day unfolded like a performance, where every smile had to be perfect and every gesture had to reflect grace. Sheikh, once attentive and charming, had begun to change. His affection had turned into control, and his admiration had become surveillance. He watched her closely, questioning her every move under the guise of protection. He wanted to know where she went, what she read, even what she thought. Her phone was monitored, her outings limited to palace-approved events. Liana told herself this was the price of being his wife, but deep down, fear had started to settle inside her like dust that never cleared. The world outside still saw her as lucky, envied her beauty, and praised her fortune. But behind those palace walls, she was slowly losing herself. Farah Qadri, the Sheikh's personal assistant, noticed the change. Farah had been loyal to Amir for years, managing his affairs and protecting his reputation. She respected him deeply, but she also pitied Liana, who seemed trapped in a world she never truly belonged to. One morning, while organizing Liana's personal wardrobe, Farah came across a small silver box hidden behind layers of scarves. Inside it was a single photograph of Liana and a young man standing by a river in Paris, their faces glowing with happiness. The date scribbled on the back was only a year old. For a moment, Farah hesitated, torn between curiosity and loyalty. She placed the photo back, but something inside her told her it was important. Later that evening, she mentioned the discovery to Sheikh Amir casually, unsure of his reaction. At first, he dismissed it, laughing off the possibility that his wife could have a secret past. But when he saw the photograph himself, something in his expression shifted. His confidence cracked just enough for suspicion to creep in. That night, he didn't speak much. He simply stared at the picture for hours, replaying every detail of their courtship in his mind. For the first time, he began to wonder if the woman he had built his life around had deceived him from the very start. The next morning, Sheikh Amir contacted a private investigator in France. The man was given only one task: uncover everything about Liana Corvell before she came to Dubai. Weeks passed quietly in the palace. Liana sensed a change in her husband's behavior, but couldn't understand why. He had grown colder, his gestures sharper, his silence heavier. The laughter that once filled their dinners was gone, replaced by tension that clung to the air. One afternoon, the investigator's report arrived. Inside a sealed envelope lay the truth Sheikh Amir had never imagined. Liana Corvell was not a single woman. She was legally married to a man named Nabi Hansar, a struggling French artist. Their marriage license, photographs, and even their address were enclosed. The evidence was irrefutable. In that moment, something broke inside the Sheikh, a mix of rage, humiliation, and betrayal. To him, it wasn't just deceit. It was a direct wound to his pride. He had spent millions to celebrate a marriage that, in the eyes of the world, was already invalid. From that day on, the palace atmosphere darkened. Guards noticed the Sheikh pacing late into the night, his temper unpredictable. Liana felt the change, but she didn't know the reason behind it. Her gifts were suddenly locked away, her freedom reduced to routine. When she tried to speak, he turned away. When she smiled, he didn't respond. The once golden palace began to feel like a storm waiting to explode. Liana's nights grew restless. She felt a chill in her chest she couldn't name, a sense that her carefully constructed lies were beginning to collapse. She had built a castle of silk and secrets, but now every thread was unraveling. Somewhere out there, Nabi still existed, unaware that his love story had turned into a ticking bomb. Sheikh Amir's silence wasn't indifference anymore, it was the quiet. Before the blood would fall, the night Sheikh Amir decided to act, the air in the palace felt different, thicker, heavier, almost expectant. He had stopped speaking to Liana altogether by then, communicating only through servants. To the staff, he appeared calm, collected, and composed. But there was a stillness in his eyes that unnerved even those closest to him. He had always been a man of control, one who never raised his voice yet made others tremble. But now, something inside him had fractured beyond repair. Betrayal had carved deep into his pride, and humiliation had poisoned his sense of reason. Liana had taken more from him than love. She had wounded the one thing he valued most: his dominance over the narrative of his life through secret channels. Sheikh Amir's men located Nabi Hansar in Paris. The artist was still living in a small studio, selling sketches to tourists, unaware of the storm that was coming. Within days, a Dubai-based gallery contacted him, claiming to admire his work and inviting him for a paid exhibition. The offer was more than Nabi had ever earned in years, and it promised an opportunity to restart his career. The gallery even covered his flight and accommodation. He accepted without hesitation, believing his life was finally turning around. He had no idea that his name had reached the Sheikh's desk and that his invitation was not a gift, but a sentence. When Nabi arrived in Dubai, he was met by a driver who claimed to represent the gallery. Instead of a hotel, he was taken to a private villa deep in the desert outskirts, miles away from the city lights. The walls of the villa were high, its gates reinforced, its silence absolute. Inside, Nabi was treated politely at first, offered food and water, told that Sheikh Amir wished to meet him personally. He didn't understand why a royal figure would be involved in an art deal, but he was too overwhelmed to question it. Meanwhile, Liana was summoned to the same villa under the pretense of a romantic surprise dinner. The Sheikh had told her he wanted to rekindle their relationship, that he wished to spend time away from the chaos of the palace. Her heart lifted with cautious hope. She dressed in a soft silk gown, thinking perhaps the distance between them was finally closing. But when she arrived, her world collapsed. Inside the dimly lit villa, the first face she saw was Nabil's, pale, confused, and terrified. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. She understood instantly what had happened, and fear surged through her body like fire. Sheikh Amir stood a few feet away, motionless, his expression cold and unreadable. The silence between the three of them was suffocating. It was the silence of realization, betrayal, and doomed love colliding in one room. What happened next was never witnessed by outsiders, but the aftermath told the story. The guards stationed outside later reported hearing faint noises, muffled cries, the shattering of glass, and the echo of something heavy hitting the ground. Then there was silence again, an unnatural stillness that lasted for hours. By dawn, only two people emerged from the villa, Sheikh Amir and one of his trusted men. Their clothes were clean, their faces calm. Nabi Hansar was never seen again. His belongings were disposed of, his name erased from travel records, his body buried deep beneath the rolling dunes of Al-Qudra Desert, where no one would think to search. Liana, broken and numb, was taken back to the palace under heavy guard. The Sheikh forbade her from leaving, ensuring she lived in isolation. Her meals were delivered to her door, her calls restricted, her every move watched by silent eyes. The palace, once alive with music and laughter, turned into a mausoleum of secrets. Liana spent her nights staring at the ceiling, replaying every decision that had led her to this moment. The man she had once loved was gone, and the man she had married had turned into her captor. The silence of the desert seemed to haunt her through the walls, reminding her that love, when mixed with power and pride, could destroy everything in its path outside. Dubai continued to shine in its usual brilliance, luxury cars gliding down spotless roads, skyscrapers piercing the sky, and the illusion of perfection unbroken. But beneath that glittering surface, one of its richest men had buried his sin in the sands, and his bride was now a prisoner of his rage, carrying a secret that could cost both of them their lives if ever uncovered. 2 weeks after that silent night in the desert, a powerful sandstorm swept across the outskirts of Dubai. The wind howled through the dunes, shifting layers of sand that had lain untouched for years. When the storm finally calmed, the earth had changed shape and something once hidden began to surface. A shepherd walking near the Al-Qudra Desert noticed a fragment of fabric poking from the sand. Pale and weathered, curiosity led him closer until he saw the outline of something far more sinister. What he found made him stumble back in horror. Within hours, the police were at the site, and word of a possible human discovery spread quietly through the ranks. Detective Omar Rashid, known for his discretion and persistence, was assigned to the case. He was told to investigate quickly and silently, for the desert belonged to powerful people, and not every secret was meant to be disturbed. At first, the remains were unrecognizable. The body had been buried hastily, wrapped in a piece of white fabric. Forensic teams worked through the heat, uncovering fragments that slowly began to tell a story. European features, remnants of an airline tag, and a trace of paint embedded under the fingernails. It didn't take long for an international alert to identify the victim. Through dental records, they confirmed the name, Nabi Hansar, a French artist who had disappeared weeks earlier after traveling to Dubai for an exhibition. That never took place. Detective Omar began tracing the last known connections tied to Nabil's visit. His flight details led to a private booking made by a company linked to one of Sheikh Amir's many businesses. That was enough to raise suspicion, though no one dared to voice it openly. Investigating a man of the Sheikh's power was dangerous. The detective moved quietly, speaking to staff, reviewing surveillance, piecing together fragments of truth from fearful whispers. He noticed something consistent. Every person who mentioned the Sheikh's new wife did so in hushed tones, as though her name itself carried danger. Inside the palace, Liana had become a ghost. She barely spoke, rarely ate, and spent her days locked in her room. The woman who once smiled at cameras and dazzled the city had vanished. Servants noticed her leaving notes, sometimes hiding them under vases or between the pages of books. One of those notes eventually reached the authorities through a housemaid who pitied her. The message was short but devastating. It read, "He buried him where the storm will someday find him." It was enough to reopen the investigation with new direction. When confronted with growing evidence, Sheikh Amir tried to use his influence to suppress the case. He offered donations, called in favors, and sent veiled threats through intermediaries. But the timing worked against him. Dubai was under growing international scrutiny for corruption cases, and the government had begun tightening control over even its most powerful figures. The police could no longer look away. A warrant was quietly issued for questioning, and within days, the illusion of the Sheikh's invincibility began to crack. Detective Omar arrived at the palace unannounced. The guards hesitated, but eventually let him in. Liana watched from her window as the detective walked through the courtyard, her hands trembling. For the first time in months, she felt the faint stirrings of hope. When the questioning began, she didn't speak immediately. But after hours of silence, something in her broke. She confessed everything: the deceit, the forced marriage, the trap that brought Nabi to Dubai, and the night that ended in blood. Her words came out like shattered glass, painful but unstoppable. With her confession and the physical evidence from the desert, Sheikh Amir's downfall was swift. His accounts were frozen, his businesses seized, and his name splashed across headlines that once praised him. The city that had once celebrated his luxury now whispered about his crimes. Within the walls of his empty palace, the silence he once imposed turned against him. He was taken into custody under heavy security, expression blank, refusing to acknowledge anyone. Liana was escorted out under protection, her face hidden behind a scarf. The reporters waiting outside shouted questions she didn't answer. As she stepped into the car that would take her away, she glanced back at the palace one last time, the place where her innocence had died, and her truth had been buried. The desert had taken everything from her, but in return, it had given her the justice she never thought she would see. In the months that followed, Dubai moved on, as it always did, washing away scandals under layers of silence. The $1.8 million wedding that once symbolized beauty and power became a cautionary legend, whispered among the elite, a reminder that beneath all the gold and perfection, lies can rot like buried bones waiting for the wind to uncover them. Liana disappeared from the public eye, living quietly somewhere in Europe, haunted by the memory of two men, one she loved, and one who destroyed everything that love once meant.